Hello, this is Danny from CG Dreams. In this video review, we're going to be looking at Ornatrix for Cinema 4D. In this long-awaited second part, we're going to be looking at some specific operators that make Ornatrix unique and how we can use the move physics. I will also sum up my thoughts on what I like and dislike and where I can see some improvements. In part 1 of this review, we looked at the primary operators that make up a basic hair groom. We used add hair, which is the base operator to add the initial starting point, edit guides to groom the hair in which all necessary tools are found, as well as making strand and channel groups, which become essential for other added operators within the stack. Hair from guides uses the guides generated and interpolates the hair within this operator, and the whip sets up the width for the hair from the root to the tip. Adding other common operators such as frizz, clump and curl are the ones you would add under most circumstances. Aside from adding the hair directly to a mesh cap or directly to the mesh of an object, you can add hair from mesh strips. To demonstrate this, I'm going to select a flat plane. Just going to make note of the size. We don't want the size of this object to be too large. It needs to be within the kind of orientation of a world space. In fact, to tell you what I'll do to demonstrate this, I will actually create more than one strip so we can see how this works. What you would normally do is you would do UVs on this strip so that any duplicate strips will also have UVs. So I'm just going to make a few here just so we can see how this works. What you can do, and I demonstrate this by just grouping these together, you can see this is one single object. What you can do is you can go to the Tools menu, go to Convert and select Polygon Islands to Objects. And what it will do is it will break them down into individual mesh strips like that. Once you have these individual mesh strips all selected, you go to the Ornatrix tab and you click on Hair from Mesh Strips. The first thing you'll notice is that you've got these red lines, and the red lines are telling you the direction from the root to the tip in which the hair is going to be growing from. This is all good and well if this end here, that where my mouse is, right, the mouse cursor, is at the root of where the hair is growing from, then all is good. But sometimes you may find that one, two, or even all of them are actually facing the wrong direction. Hence why you've got this little arrow here shown in red to tell you the direction from root to tip it's going in. We can easily flip this from a number of options in here by selecting the hair from strips object here. And then when we go into here, this is what you're normally going to see straight away, which are global settings. We'll have a look at these briefly in a minute. But when we go to mesh from strips, you can see all of the meshes that are in here, which you can enable and disable. You can see there. You can also hide the actual geometry, so you can only see the hair. And then what we can do is we can select all, if all of them are needed to be selected, that is. And then we can choose from the direction from all of these options here. As it so happens, all of them are going to go one direction or the other, so I can just simply flip them by selecting direction to flip and then rotate them, and they go the opposite direction, as you can see there. I'm going to just flip these back in case that they were actually in the right direction. If there's individual ones, you can select them individually, and then obviously you can flip them individually should you have some facing one direction and others another direction. Now, as I said from a moment ago, when we go into the Objects tab, these are regarded as global settings. So in other words, no matter which one you've got selected here, when you select hairs, for instance, per strip, and you up this, you'll see that it actually is applying to all of them. This is a good way to get the basis down for what you want. You've also got different distribution methods here, and they are quite self-explanatory. If you was to click this one here, you can see here that you've only got the distribution from the vertex position, which is basically only select 11, you have 2 hairs basically per strip. If you add more segments inside the geometry, you'll get more. This one here does something very similar, apart from it evenly distributes the distance between each of the hairs along that strip, which can be quite handy. And then finally, you've got this random distribution, which is going to be more organic. But for now, what we're going to do is we're going to stick to this uniform distribution so we can just really see what's going on here. The other thing that you will want to take into account is the points per strand. It may be that the hair strips that are from the mesh may have very few segments. In other words, you can see here as I'm moving my mouse cursor along, these are individual segments, and they won't be enough to provide a smooth hairstyle. So what you can do is you can make sure that the hair doesn't follow this strict segment from the mesh by upping the points per strand. This is something you won't necessarily see at the moment, but it is something later on that you will definitely see. So make sure that you've got this set at least high enough for the initial setting. The other thing that you can do is you can apply volume to the hair. By simply selecting the volume, you can see here that it's actually pushing the hair away from the distributed mesh either side. But what we can do, rather than have a complete mess, is we can actually choose to have from this ramp here exactly where it's applied. So I often like to have it applied somewhere in the middle to give it a little bit of volume, maybe a little bit towards the end, and that kind of gives me something a little bit more realistic to what I'm looking for when it's generating the hair. Now, if you want to have it so that the individual mesh strips are actually put into groups, which can help later on, you can actually click this and you'll see here now the groups have been given individual colors. Going to the mesh strips, you can see here that we can select the individual mesh strips. We can turn the visibility on and off, and we can also choose to have a different distribution per strip. So this is what this is for. These are settings that are per strip basis. So we can say, for instance, change the distribution to that type for that particular strip, or that one, or even this one here. What this does is it gives you a more non-uniformed way of applying this so that you can get some more variation in what you're choosing, and which can be very, very helpful when you're trying to create something looking more natural and realistic. Again, on a per guide, or shall I say per hair strip basis, you can actually apply a volume, which is only going to apply this in addition to what's set in the global settings here. You can actually take the volume completely off on this if you wanted to, but you notice here that when you go into here, you see this volume in here, this global setting for volume. When you go into the mesh strips in here, all of the mesh strips will have its initial volume set to 8 like it was in the object menu. But any additional, minus or plus, can actually be applied to them individually. Again, this gives us the option here to really work carefully with what we've got here. Also with this particular area, mesh strips, you can actually choose how many hairs per strip that you want, and you can do that on a per strip basis. This may be helpful in particular areas which haven't got enough hairs. When you go to the object mode, remember that this is a global setting in here. And this one here is a per mesh strip. Now at the moment here, what you're seeing is you're seeing these hair from mesh strips, but at the moment the hairs aren't actually grounded to anything at all. So what you would typically do is you make sure that you've got some kind of object, i.e. a head, that these are to be grounded against, so that when you do some other things with the hair, with the other operators, the hair doesn't drag away from the roots. Once you created the hair from mesh strips, you may want to convert that back to guides again, in which case you can use this operator called guides from hair. You can then move on to the next stage, in which you may want to ground the strands. Now, what this actually means, it means that the hair is going to be ground to a piece of geometry, i.e. the head or a hair cap. so that when you do certain other functions, the hair is going to go along with the geometry. So to do this, you add the ground strands, and then you go to where it says the ground tab here, and then you drag and drop in what you want to conform it to. This could be the body, or it could even be a hair scalp. So like a hair cap, for instance, we can put it into here. And then you click on this button, which normally would have some text written in here, but you click on ground. And then what this means is now it's ground to the mesh that I've selected. And that allows you to carry on to do what you need to do next. This would include going back to the Ornatrix tab, and you can click on add a edit guides, and from the edit guides you can start to continue to groom these guides so that you can move on with your initial styling that you started with, but take it even further than that. Obviously you're going to be wanting to move on to actually generating some hair again, so you would actually add the one that generates the hair. So we've got this hair from guides. As you can see there, that these guides are now responsible for directing this hair that we just added to this hair scalp. One really good feature that I found within inside Ornatrix is the ability to make braids. And this is something that's very, very helpful, because it can be a nightmare to try to work out how to do this in other different methods. And I have worked at other methods of doing it, but it is certainly a longer process than this. What we do in this particular case is we go to our Ornatrix and select on this braids guide here. And what it will do is it will create a brand new braids guide. This is another one that I've just made here. And then from here, you can select the type of preset that you want. So as an example here, we've got like a simple curl. We've got a 5-point braid, a pigtail. What we can do is we can then go to the point count so it becomes more smoother. Within that, we can change the length of this. We can change the width of it and the depth of it, etc. What we can also do is, what we will be doing is changing the frequency so it's much more of a tighter braid. Once we've done that, we can then go and select the ramp. This is so that we've got the ramp for the scale so that it gets thinner towards the end. And that is all we need to do to create this. We can do this where it is right now, or we can move it to another location. It doesn't really make any difference. It just makes it easier for you to see your braid that you're making. Now I've gone ahead and just made a braid here, and made a few little tweaks to this. And this is the braid here. That's the setup I've set for this particular object. And then what I've done is I've just extracted a little bit of a mesh from the head of this dog. And you can see here that I've gone through the normal procedure of just making the hair from this object. And I haven't really done anything special in here, just made sure that we've got enough point count. This is quite important for the braiding, because the braid is going to be using these strands to make the braid out of. And then what we do is we go straight down to adding the clump object from our operators, and then within the clump object we can simply go to here where it's set to random and select the clump amount to 1. When we do this, you can see here that we've got 1 clump in place, and that will be enough for 1 single braid. And then from this, what we can do is we can just drag and drop our braid into this pattern. And when we do this, you can see that now the pattern is taking on the form of the braid shape. From this, you may want to adjust the root blend position so that you don't have to necessarily have the braid starting very tight from where the base is. You can choose how tight you want that to be. So let's say, for instance, you wanted it to be a little more looser like that. That's something that you could do. You can go back to your braid guide at any point and change the settings. In this particular case, the length is not really going to make any difference to this because it's going by the guide length for this. But certainly the width and the other settings will make a difference to this. And that is how we can create this. Finally, when we add our hair from guides, those hair from guides are going to follow this so that we've actually got hair in form of a braid. Now, of course, when you do this, you need to make sure that the interpolation is set up which best suits this for the tightness or the looseness that you want. And you also want to make sure that when you go to your clump, you would select the appropriate setting, say for instance for the flyaway amount. So if you wanted something really, really tight, you wouldn't really have much flyaway percentage in there. Otherwise, it can get out of hand, and that's not really what we want, because we're not really dealing with the hair directly here. When it comes to the clumping, we're dealing with the clump, with the guides itself. So this is why I always turn this straight down there. And that is another way that you can add hair to your object. So as a summary so far, we can see that when we go to the Ornatrix tab, that these operators are actually divided up into groups as to what they actually do. For instance, you can see the first three here are primarily for adding hair. These ones are here that are converting, so curves from strands, mesh from strands. We've got additional ones here which are guides from mesh. These are again converting guides from curves, guides from hair, and hair from guides. So these are not to do with the grooming, but they're to do with generating hair from different methods. And then of course, when you go from there to this area here, this is all to do with the grooming part of the hair there. When it comes to dynamics, I'm no expert, so can only go on the basis of my limited knowledge of Ornatrix smooth dynamic system. Having said that, comparing to Cinema 4D's own hair dynamics, the initial outcome can be more pleasing and instant with Cinema 4D prior to making some adjustments. But there is a significant difference in performance going to Ornatrix. I would say that given Ornatrix has been shown to use its dynamics in game cinematics, that it's possible for sure, while for the casual user it may take some time and an in-depth learning of the system till you get some results that you're after. Once you've got your hairstyle done, all you need to do is decide where you want to apply the physics. In most cases, you're going to be wanting to apply it to the guides themselves, but you can also apply it directly to the hair. To apply it, you select on the Edit Guides, then go to Ornatrix tab, and then select right at the bottom here, Move Physics. One of the first things you may want to do is go to the Object tab and drag and drop the object in which you want the hair to collide with. The next thing is you may want to turn on or off the hair from guides depending on the performance of your PC. And then click on play. Right off the bat, there will be a few things that you may want to change straight away. We go to the user data, and one of the first things we would want to change is maybe the model type. By default, it's got this type of model, but if I select this one with the distance, this one tends to be the best in most cases for me. Another thing that may cause you problems is the hair may stretch uncontrollably, so the limit stretch is something that you may want to turn on also. Being that I've actually spent some time to actually groom a style of the hair, I would want to retain some of that. So what I would want to do is go down to the bottom here, or close to the bottom where it's got to attract to initial shape, and then increase the stiffness. I'm going to pull it fully up to 10. Now let's play it back. I'm going to go and select hair from guide so I can get an idea of what it looks like. And that's not a bad start. of the things you may want to do is go to the solve parameters. If you increase the step count, it will hit on performance, but it will give you a much more accurate simulation. As you can see from this, you can see the hair is responding much more better. You'll notice that when you get to the settings for the stiffness, that you also have this curve here that you can adjust. This obviously is from the left, where the root is, to the tip at the right. This means that if you found the overall stiffness, but you want it to be a little bit less stiff, maybe towards the roots or towards the tips, you can adjust that. In this particular case, I could have the bend stiffness quite high and choose just the tips to be moving mostly. I can do same with the root stiffness. And also when it comes to the attraction of the original shape, we may want to just let it loose a little bit towards the tips. To aid in the process of setting up the dynamics correctly, you've got the visualizer, which you can turn on. You can adjust the particle scale, velocity scale, force threshold, and contact scale, or you can turn these individually on and off so that you can view one at a time. The next stage, once you're happy with the settings that you've set up for your animation, is to add an animation cache. It's done by first selecting the Move Physics, go to the Ornatrix tab, and then at the bottom here, you can select the animation cache. Once this is added, all you have to do is simply go to the select file to record animation. This will open up a dialog in which you can save your file. This is handy for later on when you want to share or recall this cached animation. And then you simply just click on record animation. I have to say I'm very impressed with the speed in which it does this, especially with the fact that I've actually got 600 frames of animation. Once the calculations have been cached, all you have to do is turn off the Move Physics and allow the animation cache to take over. The only thing I've noticed is that sometimes the Move Physics are not really giving you the full visual feedback that you need while you're adjusting the Move Physics. But when you apply the animation cache, then you kind of see the real reality of how stiff you set some of those settings up. As an example, when I turn off the animation cache and put the Move Physics back on, you can see that there's far more movement. But the animation cache shows you what you've really set things up to be behaving like. Because the animation cache is so fast, it won't be too much of a problem just to reset the recorded data, clicking on here, turn back on your Move Physics, and then make some adjustments. For instance, I've set the root stiffness to be very, very stiff. Once you're done with those adjustments, you can simply go back to the animation cache and then record that again. To save time, you can also enable just a small section of this. So as an example here, you can see I've used record time range, and by enabling this, I'm only going to be rendering the first 0 to 90 frames, which you can adjust. This will give you enough idea as to how you've done those changes. Of course, we need to turn off the Move Physics so that the cache takes over. That's much more better. So now that I'm happy with that, I'm going to clear that recording and then record the entire 600 frames. As you would expect from such a sophisticated hair plugin, Ornatrix, you would expect there to be some level of control over different aspects of the physics or the dynamics to the hair system. And that is exactly what you get with Ornatrix. Looking over to here inside the Move Physics operator, you can see different areas here which have got this channel here. So we've got one here for stretching stiffness. We got one here for bending stiffness. We've also got one here for the mass channel, and one which is quite handy, I would say, is the ability to control the attract to initial shape. This means that we can control how much or where on the groom is going to be pulled back to its initial grooming state, and how much is going to be more let loose to have that flow and movement. The good thing about this is not only can we control this with channels, but we can paint these channels on a vertex by vertex basis. Let's have a look in more depth. When we go to the edit guides, you'll see here that we've got this channels area here. The channels here are per strand. This means that if you start to remotely paint just one strand, it will actually cover that value in the entire strand. When you go to the per vertex level, it means that when you start to paint, you can actually control a different value down from the tip to the root. And this is very, very convenient when it comes to things such as the Move Physics. What we're going to do is we're going to do just that. We're going to go and make a map called vertex map, and this is going to be controlling multiple aspects. Of course, you can create as many maps as you want and plug them into anywhere within any single operator for Ornatrix, because every single operator has a different element of control by the use of channels. Let's create this channel. I'm going to call this control 1 because I'm not sure what I'm going to use it for just yet. And then what we do is we want to start painting this, and when we paint this, it goes by a grayscale from black all the way through the grayscale to pure white. The black meaning that there's 0 value, and white meaning there's 100% value. Now, depending on what you're going to be applying this vertex map to is depending on how you paint these vertex maps. So as an example here, I want to control attract to initial shape, and I want only some of the groom to be applied to this. So I'm going to turn this on, attract to initial shape, and I'm going to turn this up to the full amount at 10. This means that now it will try to retain the initial shape that you can see right now. Let's play this. You can see it's doing a very good job at that. I want to have some of the hair to just flop a little bit, and this could be the case, for instance, on a groom where you want the fringe just to have a little bit of movement there. So we're going to say, for argument's sake, that right here is going to be where the fringe is. So I want the fringe area to have the full effect of having no attract to the shape stiffness. So that means that I want to paint it black, whereas white is going to mean that it's going to give 100% to this particular channel. So let's do that now. The way we do this is we go to the object, we select the brush and we select the paintbrush. We then go back to the modifier and go to our channels, where we've got this channels value here. When we start to paint, you can see here that it is working on a per vertex level because it's only painting white what we are actually painting. Now you can flood this, but I'm choosing just to go over it like this. That's absolutely fine. Now I've done this, that means that for this particular use it's 100% value, which means that it's going to 100% to revert to the initial shape. But I want a small portion of this to not abide by this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to complete opposite so that we can really see the effect. And I'm going to select just this fringe area here. Now you can select any values between there. It doesn't have to be black or white. So we can go, say for instance, that value, and then we'll work our way down as we get towards the tip, towards black. And this should give you a good idea. Now what will happen is when we go into the move physics, we go down to that channel and select it. What you'll see is this area here start to flop, but the other areas will hold to the initial shape. And of course at any time you can go back, even while you've got everything in real time, you can go back and apply just a little bit more. Maybe we'll have a little bit over this side as well. And we can just play that back. And there you go. So you can see from the channels that there are multiple aspects of these settings that can be controlled by channels. In addition to the channels, obviously you have this curve as well, which is kind of like a global setting between the root and tip. So you can really fine tune where the dynamics are going to be applied, how much the dynamics are going to be applied, and to what particular setting they're going to be applied. As if the move physics wasn't enough, we have another way of generating some dynamics with the hair, and that's by using the oscillator operator. The oscillator operator is a dynamic simulation which is more procedural. It's got less settings, but we've still got the ability to use our own channels. The beauty about this is it gives you just enough movement there which can be applied to a lot of things, such as fur in animals or even hair for a character. If I play this back right now, you'll see here that it's very smooth, fluid, and produces a really nice effect. Bearing in mind that this is real time that this is doing it. When we go over to the side here, we've got some settings that are quite self-explanatory. But some of the ones that you may want to increase is your iteration count, the amount of damping, so how fast that actually applies, and the time scale. The shorter the time scale is the shorter amount of movement time that's going to happen for this. Of course, we've got lots of other settings in here, but nowhere near the same amount as move physics. So if you wanted something quite simple as far as movement's concerned, then this is the one for you. You can also export this as an MBIC file, so there's no problems in keeping this for other projects outside Cinema 4D. The oscillator is a brilliant way of getting movement in a most simple way possible. While using Cinema 4D's hair system over the years, I found the best and only way to get a realistic groom was to apply multiple hair objects. The only problem with this is that each hair object had nothing to do with the other, so they didn't interact in any way. With Ornatrix, you can have multiple grooms, but you can actually merge those multiple grooms together, so that the groom that has the merged operator in will actually take over from that point onwards and apply to all of the grooms that have been added to the merge operator. Let's demonstrate this. In groom number 1, we've got some guides on the left hand side, and in groom number 2 we've got some guides on the right hand side. If I go into groom number 1 and select the very last operator, I can choose to add a merge from this point onwards, but I can choose to add a merge from further up in the stack, so anything after the merge will be applied also to groom 2. But to keep things simple, let's just go and select the change width. I'm going to go to the object for Ornatrix and then select the merge operator. Once I've done this, I can now drag and drop any other groom within this box, and now I can turn off the other grooms because they no longer need to be seen other than when you're inside this groom, because number 2 is now into groom number 1. I'm now going to add a edit guides. You'll notice that I can actually edit the guides of groom number 1 and 2. From the single groom of number 1. If I wanted to include some of the other operators within this merge, I just simply move the merge to be just before that. So now the frizz is going to be applied as an example. If I add a hair from guides, you'll see here that the hair has been applied to both grooms number 1 and 2, but from the single operator stack. Depending on where you put this merge operator is dependent on how much influence groom number 1 has over groom number 2. In either case, you're going to be able to merge multiple grooms into one single groom object of Ornatrix and gain control over the previous groom without being destructive in ripping or merging down or baking down any of the other grooms that you've got currently there. When it comes to dynamics and interactivity with the hair, Ornatrix has thought of everything, it seems. It's given you the move physics for full-blown physics for the hair dynamics. It's given you the oscillator, which is for more smaller, kind of simpler movement of hair. And it's also given you now the resolve collisions, which is good for interactivity with the hair, such as clothing that may interact with it or other objects that may interact with the hair. It's a really simple operator in which you add it to the stack either at the guides level or even from the hair level. You go to the collisions tab, add in the object that's going to be colliding, and then you can make some adjustments such as the recovery rate and the type of resolve mode, and then simply hit play. And of course, as you would expect, you can combine them together. For instance, I've got the oscillator and the resolve collision, and then I've added the animation cache so that we can cache all of that animation down. While performing your groom, you may come across the problem where the groom is interacting with the surface, but it's a little bit too close. Now there's two ways in which you can deal with this. You can go to the edit guide in which you've got your groom tool and move down to this area here where it says push away from surface or push away from mesh. Now when you do this, all you have to do is just click once and it pushes away. Now the only problem with this is it sometimes can push away just a little bit too much, and really trying to put in values such as say 0.5 doesn't really give you that scope and option. It's really either having it 0 or 1 or 2 or 3. So this is not really the all and only way to do things. What you can do is you can add a dedicated operator called push away from surface, and when you add this you'll find that it instantaneously fixes the problem. In addition to having this as a dedicated way of doing it, of course you can imagine that because it's a separate operator, you've got more options, such as the iteration account, such as smoothing, such as the length correction if that's needed, and the recovery rate. So you can see here that There's definitely more options here should the first option not work. And of course, there's nothing to stop you from continuing to do your groom, and then when you come back to things later on, you can then just turn this back on, because this can have quite a bit of an impact sometimes when you're doing your groom. Now the good thing about this is that what you can do is you can actually bake this down, so you don't have to have this dragging on your system's CPU. You just simply select the operator, go to bake and click on bake selected modifiers. Once you've done, that will turn into an edit guides, and then you can continue with editing your groom. As you can see from part 1 and this part 2, that Ornatrix has a lot to offer. There is so much that you can do with the hair system that I've not even been able to cover all of the operators. But what I have done is I've covered the operators that you're most likely to use quite a lot, and there's so many other things that you can do, but keep in mind that I've only scratched the surface on some of these things. What you'll notice is that you've got the ability to add the groom, sculpt the groom, apply your channels and groups, and modify individual parts, strands, or even directly sculpt the hair rather than just the guides. Because this is a more organic way of working, this is a modular way of working, it means that we can keep on stacking more and more operators on top of each other and change the order in which they've been put. This means that there's an infinite way of you creating a hairstyle and making it as realistic as you want. Add to that you've got a full braid system in there in which you can create braid very easily. Then of course you've got the dynamics. You've got more than one way of applying dynamics, and this is fantastic because you may not always want to leave your hair groom in the hands of full dynamic simulation. With so much good to say about Ornatrix, there are some downsides which need mentioning. While it's brilliant to work in such a complete hair system, I do encounter some bugs. Some are new, some are old ones that crop up here and there, but in all cases they get dealt with fast. eFear have a forum dedicated to reporting bugs, but the forum makes this harder than it could be due to the limited ability to upload images, embed YouTube, and upload files on their server. The help and support is excellent, and I always get a fast response in most cases. It would be nice to see Ornatrix not get broken as much. That's my only gripe. You must be realistic when working with dynamics and certain operators as to the impact it can have on your computer's performance. You can bake down single or multiple operators at any time to move past this. The UI and layout is good, but I'd like to see some features moved, such as having an invert button on the channels page. It's not possible to change the guide's thickness in the newer versions of Ornatrix, which is a shame, as this was helpful in the grooming stage. You can't use Cinema 4D's own forces, as going by the past request it seems Maxon is not supplying the needed API for this to be implemented. For Cinema 4D you will simply not get a better hair system. It leaves behind Cinema 4D's own hair system by some significant margin, and since using Ornatrix I can't go back to Cinema 4D's own hair system again.